Hello to my online learners. Today we are going to look at topic H, chapter 10, the integumentary system. Now, hopefully you've already looked at the science of skin as an introduction to the different parts of the skin. So we are going to look at the integumentary system, which is skin, nails, and hair. So this is a beautiful example. This is a picture of skin under a microscope. And here is a beautiful example to show you how there is different layers and different tissues. So here we have big open tissues, and then here we have a darker, denser purpley tissue, and then we have this swirlier stuff here. Then if you look in it, there's some circles with some different layers in it. So when we look at the skin, this top layer is called the epidermis, and it's full of dead skin layers, or dead cells. Then you have the dermis, which is the rest, and then there's a layer that they say is skin, but it's not really skin, and that is it's called the hypodermis, or sometimes called subcutaneous. So if we look at this picture on the textbook, there is the epidermis on top. Then the epidermis goes to this dark wavy line. Then you have the dermis, which is underneath. And in the dermis is where you find all the bits, the blood vessels, the part where the hair grows, the oil glands, the sweat glands, the pressure receptors, the blood supply. It's all in the dermis. And then underneath it's called subcutaneous, but it's also sometimes called the hypodermis because hypo means below. So this is the hypodermis. Good. So that's what we're looking at. Now, when we look at the three layers, so you've got epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Then the functions of the skin were laid out in the video. And the functions of the skin talk about many things. Regulating body temperature, getting vitamin D, and then the obvious ones like keeping us all together and separating us from the environment. Also, there is melanin, which is used to protect us from the sun's UV rays. Sweat to cool us. Then there is blood supply to help keep us cooled. Then let's just make sure I get them all. Yes, blood supply and production of vitamin D. Now there are special proteins. Collagen is the fibrous tissue that is connective tissue. So here they have collagen. And then we have keratin. Keratin is the special protein in our hair and in our fingernails. That's keratin. And then we have sebum, which is a fancy word for saying oil. Sebum comes from sebaceous glands, which is oil. Okay, so that is the main parts we look at. When we look at the epidermis, as I said, the epidermis, one of the main words is keratin. In the epidermis, this is the very top layer, so it goes to the wiggly line. The epidermis is the outer protection, and it has a bunch of layers in the epidermis. So here's the epidermis. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, well, 7 layers because the basement membrane isn't. There's 5 layers in the epidermis. I really only want you to be aware of 2 layers. The very top layer called the stratum corneum. The stratum corneum is the top layer and it is dead and it is the protective layer. Then there's a bunch of layers in between, and then there is the layer where skin starts called the stratum basale. And in this bottom layer, that's where mitosis is occurring. This is where the cells are dividing. So the cells divide and grow from this basement layer, this basale layer. And then as they grow, they push up. And then as they're pushing up, the cell organelles get replaced with keratin. And keratin is this thick protein that will then cause the cells to die. So this top layer, the stratum corneum, is a dead layer, and this is the cell that flakes off when you have dry skin. Okay? Good. The other layers you don't so much need to know, but you need to know the top layer. And one of the purposes of the top layer is to make us waterproof. So it is hard, tight, packed, dead keratinocyte. So when you see the word cytes, that means cell. So a keratinocyte is a site full of keratin. And that helps waterproof us and protect us from underneath. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, so when we look at functions of the skin, we mentioned protection from physical damage to keep the insides in. You also are protected from pathogens if your skin is a tight barrier. If you get a cut in it, sometimes this is how you can introduce disease. We talked about protection from UV light, and that's using something called melanin. All different skin tones have the same number of melanocytes, and melanocytes produce a special chemical called melanin, and then the melanin will move to the top and help protect. This is why when you get suntanned, you get darker, because it is your body trying to protect you, which is humorous because a lot of people think that a suntan makes you look healthier. However, a suntan is really your body's way of saying, protect me from UV light. Good. Another function of the skin is water retention. You have to keep your fluids in. I talked about vitamin D synthesis. Good. So that is our function of our skin. Good. The next layer I want to look at, so that's the epidermis. The outside layer is dead with the exception of the basal layer. And the make sure you know the protein name keratin. Now, the dermis is the middle layer. Sorry, it's the bottom layer of the skin, because there's really only 2 layers of skin. The dermis is where all the extra bits are found. So when you look at the dermis, you've got your blood vessels going through your dermis. You have your, here's a gland over here that goes out to the top. You have your hair bulb in the dermis. Your pain receptors are in the dermis. Your nerves are in the dermis. Pretty much everything else is in the dermis. Good. Then the bottom layer is called the hypodermis. Hypo means below. So in the hypodermis, also called the subcutaneous layer, the hypodermis is the layer below, and that's, if we look at it, this is where you find a little fatty tissue for insulation and protection, and then your muscles are in the hypodermis. Good. We talked about the function of the skin. I went through that already. I also mentioned that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, if you include the basement layer, 6 layers of the skin. The basement layer is very important to hold things together. Good. The basement layer. Good. Okay, let's look in a little more detail about the dermis, or the dermal layer. The dermal layer is where all the living parts are. And it kind of comes in 2 different layers itself. So when you look at it, there we go. There is this papillary layer, which is the one, papillary means kind of finger-like or bumps. And papillary is just a word for bumps. So here's your papillary finger-like layer. And then you have the reticulo layer underneath it. The papillo layer is the one that has the bumps on it. And it is just below the basement layer. And it is collagen fibers, and that's what gives you the fingerprints. This is also, it's finger-like in order to, it has these wiggly bits in order to help intertwine the top layer with the bottom layer. If it was flat, it would move a lot faster. So that is the papillae layer. Now, and then the bottom is the reticular layer, and the reticular layer is thicker. It is woven collagen and elastic fibers, and it's collagen and elastic that give the property its springiness. So collagen is there for strength, elastin is there for elasticity. Good. And and this is all where you find the hair and the glands. So here's our reticular layer. You've got your glands, you've got your pressure receptors, and you have your blood vessels. This is a muscle that is attached to the hair. We'll look at it in a bit. Here is an oil gland or a sebaceous gland. Here is a sweat gland. Good. So attached to every hair follicle, there is an oil gland, and that is to naturally keep your hair healthy. The hair is a dead item. We will look at the hair in a bit. Then you also have your sweat gland in it. You have something called melanocytes. And also in your dermal layer is where you find your sense, pressure, and vibration receptors. Sorry. So you've got your laminated corpuscles. Those are pressure ones. Then you've got your Meissner, which is a tactile one. Then you have another stretch receptor here. Ideally, you just need to know that we're trying to get rid of Meissner and Pastner, but laminated corpuscles are for pressure and the tactile ones are for stretch. Good. And we also have thermal receptors and pain receptors. Okay. So the laminated ones down here, they are for pressure and vibration. The tactile ones, the Meissner, are for light touch because they're closer to the top. The Merkel ones are also for light touch and also shape and texture. Basically, I want you to know that it's the dermis that has the receptors, and we have receptors for touch, pressure, and pain. Good. And I think, let me check what else we need to know. We've got that. We've got our receptors. We have stretch receptors. Now, there are two types of glands that we need to look at. There are sweat glands and there are sebaceous glands, which are oil glands. The sweat glands start in the dermis and they empty out onto the epidermis. So here is our sweat glands. Our sweat glands produce something called sweat, and sweat is water and salt. There are two different types. Don't worry about the two different types at this level, but you might want to read how your armpits and genital areas sweat differently than the rest of your body. One is milkier. The reason why your sweat smells is because the bacteria on your body is using the oils and producing waste. Then we have a sebaceous gland. Sebaceous gland produce sebum, and sebum is basically the oil of your skin. And sebum is actually very important because it helps waterproof you and prevents your hair and skin from drying. Sadly, the world wants to have us scrape off our natural stuff and then put chemicals on top so that we protect our skin. But if you just let it be, our skin can protect our skin. Okay, that's enough for sebaceous glands. For glands and the epidermis and the dermis. I will continue on with hairs in a separate video.